Welcome SAO survivors! I did my Sword Online last Recollection demo impressions on release day. Now it's time for the proper first impressions using the full game, which admittedly ended up being better than I expected it to be following the demo experience. I'll try to cover all the different aspects quickly in this first impressions video, but if you're looking for something that is much more in-depth, I will publish my ultimate review later when I complete everything the game has to offer. So far, I'm merely about 30 hours in, although I'm pretty sure the game is counting my AFK and even in menu time as well in that clock, so take that as you will. I'm playing on hard mode, and while my focus has been story mainly, I did a fair bit of NPC quests as well as hunting quests that will be part of the later game as well. Now, before we begin, the game was provided to me by Bandai Namco Germany. However, I have not been provided any kind of guidance as to what I should say or not, nor was I ever required to put my review through their editorial. They wished me fun, and the only kinda sorta request was per my clarification request regarding the contradictory spoiler rules that both SAO Games Japan and SAO Games US published, to which they said they received no information about it at all, but they still recommended that I follow by the kind request of the US side, which is more than understandable, that I wish the Japanese side would not prepare the launch trailer to be so spoilery to begin with. I digress. So anything beyond chapter 5 has to be properly spoiler tagged. That's it, that's the spoiler rule. And good thing I won't talk about anything beyond chapter 5 in this video. The goal is to give you as complete of an impression about the overall game that I can without delving into anything specific here. The rest belongs in my ultimate review down the line. Make sure to subscribe for that one. So let's start with the quick section on story and presentation, and then we'll move on to gameplay and mechanics / systems. The first thing I want to highlight is how much of a difference it makes to have a likable companion character once again by our side. And, of course, that the demo was quite misleading how chore heavy the game would be, for lack of a better term, due to having the tutorial to the puzzles taking an hour of playtime in the demo, which is barely utilized in the rest of the main story and is mostly relegated to NPC quests. The early game, the first 5 chapters that is considered to be non-spoilery portion, is, at its core, a rudimentary game introduction. From a structure standpoint, it is as simple as it gets. You meet the new characters, you go on a journey to the Dark Territory, and then explore different regions of the Dark Lands, meeting the characters of the Dark Territory side, while more characters join on your journey as well from the human side, until you get the full roster, at least for now. It is the sort of thing that normally you'd be expecting it to be, boring and exposition heavy, but your accompanying characters are such a likable bunch that it never feels that way. Dorothy is introduced to you from the get-go with her traumas, and over the course of the early story, you're also exploring her past while also trying to bring down her walls, as she is someone who is stuck between both worlds in a sense, also shunned in her own homeland. If you read the light novels, you can think of her personality similar to Lipia and Shasta, but as a young teenager version with less life experience. Her kind, caring, and admittedly awkward nature is really a highlight of the story / narrative, and her introductions with not just Kirito but also other characters. Similarly, I expected Sarai to be the token little child character, similar to Medina's wayfarer friend in Lycoris, but Sarai actually adds to Dorothy's character on this front. Dorothy, while young, is aware of the realities that surround her, that of the Dark Territory and the human realm being enemies. And Sarai, among all the blunt adults, speaks quite often as the voice of a pure-hearted person, a simpler perspective, I'd say. And our third new character, Kainan, is mainly our comedic relief. I'd usually just sigh in such cases. He's quite simply a greedy merchant on the surface, and all jokes pretty much follow that facade, but it's very clear here that there are things he does value more as well. And the dynamics of this trio really ended up being thoroughly enjoyable for me in an otherwise simple introductory journey, and only gets better when we reach our destination for the peace talks and the story slowly starts ramping up at that point. As I said back in my demo impressions, the best praise you can have about new characters is that you want to learn more about them, to spend more time with them, and I'm the opinion that the Dark Territory trio certainly manages to get themselves above that threshold very nicely. But that doesn't mean our usual cast is getting sidelined here. Alice and Yujo are our main companions, of course, Asuna closely behind, although admittedly everybody else takes a large backseat, and I love it! If you ever checked my earlier videos, it's been years since I made a video about the bloated cast of the SAO games, and since then, it has become one of my main criticisms that we were getting up to 40 or more characters with barely anything meaningful for them to do or say. They were just being pushed into these games because they are marketable entities. That is not the case here. This time, they're not constantly trying to remind you that they exist by randomly interjecting a single line here and there. They only speak when they have a role to play or something important to say. Like how Shinon is perceptive about Dorothy's attitude, or how the blunt Lisbeth is the first one to open up to Kirito about the circumstances regarding the upcoming war. And the story dialogues, they capture these characters so well. Last time I gave this praise to the SAO gamers was back during Hollow Realization DLCs, and I was mainly focusing on the character-specific heroine quests that dive deeper into the nature of these characters very nicely. It really makes me happy to see the characters so well and respectfully portrayed to their true selves. Of course, the effect of Akatsuki Kana, the author of Violet Evergarden, is felt with these good portrayals of character. However, if we move over to the presentation side of the story, I feel like we take a step back. Last Recollection, much like almost all SAO games, is primarily a visual novel. And sadly, we see a large departure from the typical visual novel presentation featuring dialogue sprites in the main campaign in favor of in-engine 3D stock animations. For actual cutscenes, this is fine. I really like the in-engine cutscenes with custom animations. They have come a very long way over the 10 years. I don't even remember if we had in-engine cutscene attempts back in Hollow Fragment, but for regular dialogue scenes, they're better than they used to be. The stock animations are a bit more flexible. It seems like they can now flag them to start in the middle of a sentence and the like, for the emote to match the exact words where the emphasis is. And there's a slightly increased range in the amount of emotes used in conversations, but it still does not feel like it's at a polish or visual quality level where I can prefer them over the charm of the 2D visual novel sprites. And I'll be perfectly honest, personally, I prefer that charm of the 2D sprites anyways, but I know there's a large audience who would disagree with me on that front. Regardless, the 3D stock emotes and visuals, they're definitely not up to par to carry an interesting and lengthy conversation. More bad news on that front. Gallery images that we are so accustomed to for key story moments in previous games, they are completely non-existent in the main story, earlier portions at the very least. This further impacts the variety or good visualization opportunities quite negatively, if you ask me. The good thing is we have these things, what I call storyboard cutscenes, which are a decent new addition, especially for narrative purposes rather than dialogue, and it's probably why a lot of the exposition in this game feels easier to digest compared to something like Lycoris, where exposition is provided in dialogue format. These storyboard cutscenes, they are mostly still renders that are animated slightly via simple camera movements, or at times even scenes that are closer to a limited anime sequence, let's say. I think these are great additions to the game and greatly benefited storytelling. However, I find the grain filter to be absurdly strong. The game is already overly dark due to mostly being locked into the dark territory. I don't think there was any reason to further wash out the colors this way. Luckily, a more traditional experience with 2D sprites and plenty of gallery images return with the character quests and the like. On that note, I do sometimes get the feeling that the game has extremely long story PTSD from Lycoris, that they are really trying to make sure the early chapters fly by fast because of how long it was back in Lycoris, but while doing so, I find myself like the pacing is a bit too erratic. We're constantly going somewhere, doing something, returning home, rinse and repeat, with little actually meaningful stuff happening throughout. That makes these early chapters makes them feel like a checklist. We're supposedly going to these different regions to learn more about the other races, but in the end, I feel like the game teaches you absolutely nothing about them, making me feel like I spent 30 minutes on a journey that absolutely meant nothing. But as I said, these portions are generally carried by the interactions between the new Underworld characters, so not much of a big issue, I guess. Overall, the presentation is both a big step up from what can end up being boring, as well as a big step down for what can be much more intense or engaging. A much safer approach, sure, that limits the presentation into an acceptable state most of the time. Nothing terrible, nothing amazing. The gameplay is slightly better than in the demo with subtle improvements here and there, and I am enjoying it a lot more as I get more and more accustomed to the systems and their limitations. For example, I no longer need to come to a complete stop with my attacks to give a thumbs up to my partners. I can just do that during the course of an action, same as it was back in Halo Realization, unlike what we had in the demo. But you know, generally it's just a typical evolution you can expect that goes back all the way to Halo Fragment, the combat. Some people may call it de-evolution in the case of Lycoris to Last Recollection, but I completely disagree on that front. Simplifying existing systems, eliminating unnecessary or redundant complexity, it is a form of evolution. And Last Recollection aims to be friendlier towards newcomers, which is a funny choice as the final game in the series, but a welcome one nonetheless. However, the problems I stated in my demo impressions, they remain for the most part. I feel like the effort of simplification here quite often comes at odds with the actual functions themselves. In a nutshell, the effort seems to have gone into making everything so accessible that barely anything has any information to digest, which in turn makes the accessible feature borderline meaningless unless the player feels involved enough to dive into deeper levels of information, in which case they never needed the simplification anyways. My main example was ally commands back in the demo impressions, and I feel like it is still a good example to point out because nothing is different on that front. I got 4 ally commands at my disposal per ally, but aside from telling me the exact skill names, they give me no meaningful information. Lycoris never had this simple layout, you commanded allies in the exact same complexity as you played your own character, thus it required a little bit more knowledge. It required that you knew what every skill did that was on the palette. I could break shields with Vorpal Strike, I could break a charge/enhancement attempt with my Moment Bite if I remember correctly. In Last Recollection, the ally commands are broken down into this 4 color scheme for different types of actions. You know, it does look helpful on the surface level, sure, green is probably healing, not sure what the exact skill does, but it should heal given the color coding and the description. The pink says it's for break, so it should break the enemy charges or shields, right? Well, not exactly. The game in fact has 4 different types of breakable status, for example, more than Lycoris had. There is the anti-air break, there's the bullet break, there's the charge break, and there's the guard break. You can't just command your ally to break and have it magically work. You need to know which exact skill to use and memorize their effects because the command screen won't tell you. This may be easy if you're playing with 3 teammates with one-handed sword skills, which would be a problem on its own because not every weapon type has all kinds of breaks, but if you're using characters of different weapon types, as you should, you really need to get out of your comfort zone here, which puts the simplification into question here. Now, don't get me wrong, the criticism here is not that the original one was too complex. It is technically as simple as knowing which of your Pokemon has access to which HM in a given situation, where Yu-Gi-Oh, Alice and Dorothy are your 3 Pokemon in the team. The criticism itself is that the ally command system was simplified, and as it was being simplified, it took away your flexibility in order to, well, make it all simpler, yet nothing changed in regards to simplicity. You still need to know what the skill does because the game doesn't tell you on the palette. You know what's one very easy way to fix this? The panel is very simplified anyways, just give me basic info on what a skill does. So when I pull up the ally palette, for example, if the break move is set as Vorpal Strike, simply denote C break to tell me it is indeed charge break and not any of the other 3 breaks. That way, I can easily give one character a C break for charge, another an A break for anti-air, another a D break for defense break, and I'll wield a B break for bullet break. Like, you can't tell me you didn't design this to spell out A, B, C, D for simplicity's sake. Just communicate it to me on the ally screen rather than expecting me to memorize it anyways. That's it. As things stand, a lot of systems like this have been simplified just for the sake of it, just for show, actively taking away flexibility, but the quote-unquote simplicity it offers is a surface level one that does not meaningfully simplify the game for newcomers. Aside from the criticism of this simplification process, I really don't have anything else to say on gameplay. It's the same gameplay you know for years now, with slight changes here and there, some good, some bad, so your mileage may vary depending on your personal preferences. The more I played, the better my experience became. I feel like a lot of the criticism otherwise just comes from the fact that people jumped into last Recollection with their Lycoris muscle memory still intact, and due to how similar they both looked, their brain just fell into the uncanny valley trying to play with that Lycoris muscle memory rather than adapting to the little changes early on. There's really nothing egregious here. In my opinion, we got a more approachable system that just needs a little bit of tweaking / optimizing, like adding those ABCD break tags to the ally commands I mentioned earlier, or allowing us to skill connect manually out of the predetermined auto chain I talked about extensively in the demo impressions. Simple tweaks and improvements is all Last Recollection needs in terms of its gameplay systems, and it also needs the players to adapt when it comes to the small and subtle changes it had from Lycoris. Being a direct sequel to Alicization Lycoris, you also start the game with the full list of sword skills available to you since you're considered to have unlocked them in the previous game. I like that continuity aspect. I saw some people complain that part of their fun was tediously unlocking all of these skills and grinding weapon proficiency, which, if you really feel that way, all the power to you, but honestly, such comments just make me scratch my head. Instead of the skill unlock grind, you have the empowering of the skills, granting them their bonus effects, like the aforementioned break abilities, as well as other things like the derivation skills, how you can derive double circular into shine circular with additional correctly timed prompts like in Lycoris, or status effects like defense down, attack down, etc. I found this to be a much better version since I was just able to settle into my comfortable skill palette right from the get-go in the game and then unlock additional effects or benefits as time went on, and unlocking them wasn't too much work either. It was pretty straightforward. There are lots of skill points to be found all around the map actually. The Sacred Arts have also been simplified. I'm specifically going into Sacred Arts because people think it is no longer in the game. They're now part of the normal skill palette, and they kind of seem to be a disappointment yet again. In Last Recollection, as I said, most people don't even seem to know they exist because they're kind of hidden in the menus, so that's a thing. Overall, with 30 hours under my belt, I'm quite pleased with the game so far overall. Not that many complaints, but rather nitpicks here and there. I switched to hard difficulty early on because the game felt easy and while the story content felt balanced, the NMs out on the field, they can sometimes feel needlessly tanky. Granted, I am underleveled and my gear is not in top shape. You know, we'll get much more powerful later down the line, especially as we rack up the mastery stars for the skills as well, given huge attack boosts. But even still, I feel like a clear balance has been missed with the NM bosses. They feel so tanky that they take up to 30 minutes to defeat sometimes, but they do not have the attack power to feel threatening at all. You can literally tank them for 30 minutes straight without any issues. They feel more like a chore than a challenge. You know, this is generally outside the scope of a first impressions video, but named monsters are such a big part of the endgame grind in these games, so I'd like to see them balanced a bit better. Slightly decreasing their HP or defense values while slightly increasing their attack potency, it feels like a simple enough change that's kinda needed for their balancing. And this video has already been much longer than I intended for a first impressions video, so I'll wrap things up here. If you have questions, ask them in the comments. I will answer them. I am much more ahead right now than what you see in the video clips over here. And of course, smash that like button and subscribe for the ultimate review for Last Recollection later down the line when I fully and completely finish the game. Check these videos on the screen if you haven't. It helps them show up in YouTube recommendations, thus helping the channel immensely. I strongly recommend my opening explained video for Last Recollection. A huge thanks to all my channel members and patrons, and as always, stay cool.